I want to start by saying this plainly. I don't actually think impulsive spending is the right phrase for what I experience. And I know that might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but words matter here. Because when people say impulsive, it sounds quite careless, like you've got bored or something, and that you didn't think about it, or you just went, oh, sure, why not? And that's never quite how it feels for me. What I experience isn't like that at all. It's heavy, it can be intense, and it's very, very driven, very hyper focused. For me, this isn't about a lack of thinking. It's about thinking becoming too focused. It's about my brain deciding very, very convincingly that something is very necessary. Not as in oh, it's nice to have, or it's like a treat, or it's just not optional. But I have to have it. And once that decision is made, everything else fades into the background. Sometimes it does make me feel quite embarrassed by it. And because this is where usually the shame starts, people assume that if you spent the money impulsively, you must not have thought it through. That's not my experience at all. If anything, I think too much. I think about how will this thing help? How will it change something? How will it move me forward? How will it finally make things easier? And there's always a story attached to it, a very convincing one at that. And in the moment, that story makes complete and utter sense. And that's why the word impulsive doesn't land for me. Impulse suggests randomness. This isn't random at all. Other than, 5 minutes ago, I may not have known that this existed. It becomes focused, directed, purposeful. It just happens to be narrow. The rest of the picture disappears because my brain can't hold it at the same time. And I think that distinction matters because when we get the language wrong, we get the response wrong too. And if you believe something is being careless, someone, is being careless, you give them rules, budgets, restrictions, advice. But if what's actually happened is conviction plus urgency, then rules don't touch the experience. They arrive way too late. And I also want to say this in case somebody listening needs to hear it. Just because something felt necessary in the moment, it doesn't mean that you were lying to yourself. Just that your nervous system believed it. And belief in that state can be very powerful. This isn't just us being, we're not being stupid, although I do say that to myself sometimes, but it's a brain that's trying to solve something quickly. So before we go any further in this conversation, I want to get rid of the shame and get it off of the table. Just for now, because we can't understand what's happening if we're busy attacking ourselves for it. And this isn't being bad with money. It's about what happens when your brain decides it has found the answer, the solution to all of my problems. And there's a moment that I've spent a lot of time noticing this where something shifts, something internally, and I can feel it. It's not dramatic or anything like that. It's like a click. 1 minute, I'm just a person who's seen something nice. The next minute, my brain has decided this matters. This is the most important thing of the day. And once that switch flips, the way I think changes. The best way I can describe it is narrowing. My world gets smaller, not emotionally, but cognitively. The thing I want moves to the center and everything else fades to the edges. And not because it's unimportant, not because I've forgotten that it exists, although it may have feel as if I've forgotten everything else in that moment, but because I literally can't hold it at the same time. And this is where people misunderstand. From the outside, it can look like obsession. However, from the inside, it feels more like it's, tunnel vision. And I'm not choosing to ignore the bigger picture. The bigger picture has simply gone offline. And when that happens, time changes too. The urgency ramps up. The idea of not resolving this, not acting, starts to feel really uncomfortable, sometimes even unbearable. It's like an internal panic or like it's agitation, a sense of being unsettled until this thing is dealt with. And what's important to say here is this. This doesn't feel reckless. It feels purposeful. It feels like my brain has locked onto something that will fix a problem, even if I can't fully articulate what that problem is. And there's often a quiet thought underneath it all. It's not always in words, but it's in feeling. Something like, this will help. This will make things easier. This will help me to move forward. And when you've lived a life where forward motion hasn't always been easy, where clarity comes and goes, and that feeling is incredibly compelling, this is also where judgment usually creeps in, though, because people assume that this type of urgency equals immaturity or entitlement, possibly a lack of discipline. But what it actually feels like is my system saying, pay very close attention because this matters. And as we are being open, I want to be honest about something else too. When I'm in this state, I'm not weighing things up in a balanced way, but I'm also not being thoughtless. I'm thinking just narrowly. I think about how I will use the thing, where it fits, what it unlocks. And it's not just about what it costs me elsewhere. Not because I don't care, but because my brain can't then focus on anything else. And that's why advice like this, just about the consequences, just doesn't land. I mean, I would if I could, but I've already convinced myself that there are no consequences. And in this moment, my mind has already prioritized it above anything else. It's decided that it's urgent. And urgency always wins. What's tricky that is that from the inside, this state can feel strangely calm, fully focused, crystal clear, absolutely certain. And if you spent a lot of your life feeling scattered or unsure, that kind of clarity can feel like a relief, like finally landing somewhere solid. I think this is why it's so misunderstood, because we assume urgency looks like chaos, looks chaotic. But sometimes it looks quiet, determined, almost rational until it's over. And that's the switch. Not a loss of intelligence, not a moral failing, just a nervous system and a brain doing what they do best, locking onto something they believe will bring relief. And this is the part that feels almost predictable now, not in an easy sense, but familiar, because I've learned that there's a very specific moment where things tip. And it's usually not in the shop or on the website or in the moment when I first see the thing. It's later when I get home. If I see something and then forget about it, then that's fine. That happens too, by the way. And I think that's important to say. This isn't everything. This isn't constant. But if I get home and that item comes back into my mind or it hasn't left my mind, that's when I know. Because once I start thinking about it again, it's like my brain goes, oh, right, yes, that. And then it's there. I'll be making a cup of tea and suddenly I'm picturing it. I'll be doing something completely unrelated and my mind drifts back to that thing. And at first it's quite subtle. It's just a little thought, but then the thoughts stack. I start imagining where it would go, how I'd use it, what problem it would solve. And then almost without realizing it, I'm building a case for it and I'm hooked, not consciously, not like I'm trying to justify anything. It just happens. And this is the bit that's hard to explain to people who don't experience it. The thinking doesn't feel stressful at first. It feels engaging, almost comforting. Like my brain has found something solid to focus on. And yeah, but then it starts looping and I can't unsee it. The idea of not having it starts to feel wrong. Like something's unfinished, unresolved. And at that point, the desire isn't in the background anymore. It's front and center. And I'll catch myself thinking things like, well, I could make it work, or I don't actually spend that much on myself, or this is different from anything else. This one actually matters. And the scary thing is, all of that feels so true in the moment. It feels really strong. And this is usually where people would say, "Oh, just distract yourself." And sometimes, yes, distraction can help if it's an outside distraction, as my internal radar cannot be distracted any longer at this point. Once a thought has really lodged, distraction isn't neutral. It feels like avoidance, like I'm trying to ignore something extremely important. So my brain keeps pulling me back. And this is where the intensity wraps up. Because now it's not just a thought, it's a pull. The kind of mental itch that won't go away. The longer I don't act, the louder it gets. Sometimes I can't even sleep. And I'll try to reason with myself. I mean, I really will. I'll say, let's just leave it a day. Let's just see how I feel tomorrow. I don't need to decide right now. But even as I'm saying that, part of me already knows I'm probably going back. I'm not probably going back. I'm definitely going back. And that's not because I lack discipline. It's because the loop has started. It will be like a race within myself. Don't think anymore. Just do it. And once it's started, it has its own momentum. And this is why leaving the shop doesn't equal safety. This is why just don't buy it straight away isn't a solution. Because for me, the real battle doesn't start until after, when the idea has space to grow. And I think this is where a lot of misunderstanding happens, because from the outside, it looks like a choice. It looks like I've gone back and changed my mind. But from the inside, it feels more like a process that's already in motion. Like the decision has been made somewhere deeper and I'm just catching up with it. And that's the part I wish more people talked about. I think it is dramatic, although it can come across as quiet. It's definitely persistent and incredibly convincing. And there's another part of this that I almost didn't want to include. Not because not because it isn't true, but because it's one of those things that feels hard to admit out loud, because it doesn't sound great, but it's still real. And if somebody tells me I don't need the thing, or that I shouldn't get it, or that I can't have it, my anxiety goes through the roof. And I want to be really clear here. This isn't me being stubborn. It's not me thinking, you can't tell me what to do. Well, I'd be lying if that was the case, but it's also something much more physical than that. It's like my chest tightens. My thoughts speed up. And suddenly the need for the thing feels even stronger, not calmer, not soothed, but so much stronger. I just have to have it. And for a long time, I judged myself for that. I told myself it meant that I had a problem with authority or that I was childish or entitled. But the more I've paid attention to it, the more I've realized it's not about the item at all. It's about being blocked. When someone says no, my system doesn't hear advice. It hears loss of control. It hears someone else deciding. And that does something inside of me. Something old, something panicky. And I don't consciously think, oh, they're taking my autonomy away. But my body reacts as if they are, like a door's just been slammed. And when that happens, the urgency ramps up. It's like the part of me that was already fixated goes, oh, now we really do need this. And this is why I stopped telling people. Not because I wanted to hide or because I wanted to be sneaky, but because I learned that if I involved other people, it often made the whole experience much more intense, more overwhelming, more dysregulating. And that's a weird kind of logic. There's a weird kind of logic to that. When I look at it now, if you know that something increases your anxiety, you avoid it. So I did quietly. And I think this is one of the reasons this pattern can feel so isolating, because it happens internally, silently, and sometimes so fast. People don't see the mental tug of war. They just see the outcome. And what they don't see is how much effort goes into holding it together, how much energy is spent trying to keep things from escalating, how much self-monitoring is happening at this time. And again, this is where advice falls flat, because telling someone in this state, you don't need it, or you don't buy it, or, just don't buy it, it doesn't calm the system, it activates it. And I wish we talked about that more openly too, about how restriction doesn't always create safety. Sometimes it creates threat. And when a nervous system feels threatened, it doesn't become reasonable. It becomes urgent. And this is also why I struggle with hard rules around money, strict budgets, bans, black and white, can't have thinking. They don't soothe me. They make me feel trapped. And when I feel trapped, everything gets louder. I'm not saying boundaries are bad. Absolutely not. I'm saying how they are experienced matters, because a boundary that feels like punishment will always trigger resistance in my head, even if it's self-imposed. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to record this episode, because when we don't talk about this part, people assume the problem is lack of discipline, when actually, a lot of the time, it's about safety. And I know there will be people listening who are probably nodding along right now, who have learned to keep these urges private, who don't involve anyone else, who manage it internally as best that they can because they're trying to cope. And if that's you, I want you to know something. Avoiding escalation is not the same as being dishonest. It's protecting your nervous system. And it's not the same as being irresponsible. Sometimes it's the most regulated option available. And surely that matters. And this is where certain items, there are certain, let me rephrase that. There are certain items where this pattern hits harder for me. And I think that's important to talk about because it's not random. For me, it's clothing, courses, and sometimes books, especially cookery books, and occasionally things for the house. It's rarely, I don't know, gadgets or novelty stuff or things with no meanings attached. It's always things that carry a promise. Clothing is probably the biggest one for me for how it can make me feel in a whole variety of ways. And I want to say this gently because it's easy for people to dismiss it. It's not about fashion or about following trends, or it's not about shopping for fun or liking nice things. It's more about identity. A piece of clothing for me often represents a version of myself, a version who's more confident, more put together, less overwhelmed. So somebody who knows how to show up. So when I see something and really like it, really like it, it's not just, oh, that's a nice top. It's, oh my God, this is me, but better. It can represent me at this event or when I meet with friends or whatever the reason. And it's really powerful to me because when you've spent a lot of your life feeling like you don't quite fit or that you're always adjusting, masking, compensating, anything that promises ease or coherence can feel magnetic. Courses work in a similar way for me. I've spent thousands on courses over the years. Thousands. And what's hard to admit is that at the time, every single one of them felt necessary. Not optional, not indulgent, but necessary. Each one felt like, yes, this is it. And this is the thing that will finally get me to the next level. The thing that will help me make sense of things. The thing that will unlock something. And again, that belief is totally real. In that moment, it wasn't delusional. It was hope. And what tends to happen though is that I'll start strong, I'll show up, I'll engage, and then something shifts. Whether I get bored, or sometimes my capacity drops, or life just happens, and then suddenly I'm behind. In me, something then shuts down. And at that point, it's not just about the course anymore. It's about shame. It's about feeling like I failed yet again. Like I can't follow through. Like I've proved something awful about myself. So I stop turning up. And it's not because I don't care. I probably care a lot, but because it hurts too much to to face. And books can do this to me too. I'll see a book and I think, yeah, this will explain something. This will help me understand. This I can learn something about myself. This will change the way I see things. And sometimes it does, and I'll read it the way, I'll read it all the way through in a great speed. And sometimes it will just sit there. And every time I see it unfinished, it carries a sense of disappointment. The common thread in all of this isn't the spending. It's the idea of arrival. That there's a version of me just one purchase away, one course, one outfit, one piece of information. And I don't think that comes from arrogance. I think it comes from longing for things to feel easier, longing for clarity, longing for a sense of, I've got this. So when something seems to offer that, of course my brain locks into it. Why wouldn't it? I think that's what makes this so painful, is that the hope is genuine. And when the thing doesn't deliver, or I can't deliver on it, the disappointment feels very personal, like I've let myself down again. This is why the self-talk afterwards is so brutal, because it's not just, oh, well, that didn't work. It's, why do you keep believing this? Why do you always think this time will be different? And if the hope itself is the crime, and that's something I want to slow down with. Obviously, I'm a lot meaner to myself than what I've just said, but because wanting things to be different doesn't make you naive. It's just you being a human. And this is the part that I think people really struggle with the most when I try to explain it, because it sounds like I'm saying I have no agency. And that's not what I mean either. But I need to say this clearly, even if it's uncomfortable. When I'm in that state, I can't take myself out of it by myself. If I could, we wouldn't be here having this discussion. I've spent years trying. And I've tried logic, I've tried budgeting, tried following rules, I've tried talking sense into myself. I've tried all the things people suggest. And none of them work from inside when I'm inside that state. That's something I wish that I'd understood earlier, because I used to think the problem was that I wasn't trying hard enough, that if I just found the right system, the right mindset, the right level of discipline, I'd finally be able to stop myself. But here it is. When that switch has flipped, when the urgency is there, when my thinking has narrowed, I don't have access to the part of me that can calmly weigh things up. It's not online. I can see what's happening, which is the frustrating part. I'm not unaware. I know the pattern. I know the likely outcome. I know I've been here before many times, but knowing doesn't equal being able to choose differently. It's a bit like trying to reason with yourself when you're overtired or hungry, angry, or overwhelmed. You can understand what's sensible, but your body is driving the bus. And in this state, my body is loud. Sometimes people say, just sit with the feeling. And I understand why they say that, but sitting with it doesn't feel neutral for me. It doesn't feel wise or grounded. It feels like pressure building, like trying to hold breath whilst your body is screaming for air. And the longer I try not to act, the louder things get. My thoughts speed up, my agitation increases, my heart beats faster, my focus narrows even more, until eventually action feels like the only way to make it stop. And when I do act, when I buy the thing, there's relief. Not necessarily joy exactly, but relief. It does actually feel quite good. It's a quieting. It's like my nervous system can finally exhale, because it sounds like I'm saying the behavior works, and in a way it does in the short term, which is why this isn't about willpower. Because if something reliably reduces distress, your system will keep reaching for it. And that's not a moral failing. It's more like a learning, and this is also why being told, just don't do it, or you should just be able to stop yourself, feels so invalidating, because it ignores what's actually happening in my body. It assumes access I don't have in that moment. I think this is where a lot of the shame comes from being told directly or indirectly that if we're aware, we should be able to control it. And when we can't, we conclude something is wrong with us. But I don't think this is about something being wrong. I think it's about capacity, about how much intensity a system can hold before it needs discharge. And sometimes my capacity just isn't there, which doesn't mean that it'll never be there. It doesn't mean things can't change, but it does mean that expecting myself to self-regulate perfectly every single time from inside a highly activated state is just unrealistic and, to be frank, unkind. And what I needed, and what I think a lot of people need, was permission to stop pretending that this is easy, to stop framing it as a simple choice, and to start being honest about what is actually happening. Because once we name that some states aren't self-excitable, that conversation changes. It becomes less about blame and more about support. And there's a moment after it's all over, after the thing has arrived, after the course has started or not, after the excitement has faded and it's quiet. Not peaceful quiet, more like noise has moved somewhere else. That's usually when it starts, the voice. And honestly, the voice is worse than the spending, because money matters, consequences matter. But the way I talk to myself afterwards, that does more damage than any purchase ever has. And it starts small, almost reasonable. Something like, oh, right, well, that wasn't what you thought it would be. And then it sharpens quickly. And before I know it, I'm saying things to myself that I would never say to another person. Not even somebody I disliked. Definitely not somebody I cared for. Things like, what did you expect? Why do you always do this? Are you stupid? You should have known better, idiot. You never stick at anything. Ugh. You've wasted your money yet again. And that kind of language, that tone. And what gets me now, what really stops me, is realizing how normal that's become, how automatic. There's no pause where I decide to be cruel. It just happens. Like a reflex. Like I've just tried to justify it in the past. I've told myself it was accountability, that I was being honest with myself, that I needed to be firm so that I wouldn't repeat the mistake. But if I'm really honest, that voice isn't firm. It's vicious and it's cruel. And I know that because of one very simple test. I wouldn't speak to anybody else that way. Not a friend, not a stranger, not even somebody who messed up badly. So why is it? Why is it acceptable internally? Why do I do this to myself? And I think part of it might be fear of having hoped again, fear of having believed something might help, fear of trusting myself and being disappointed again. So the voice comes in to make sure that I remember, to make sure I don't forget how bad this feels. It's like it's saying, if I hurt you enough now, you won't do this again. Maybe at some point in my life, that strategy made sense. Maybe being hard on myself did keep me safe. But now it just keeps me stuck. That voice doesn't stop the cycle. It fuels it. And after a while, being inside my own head becomes unbearable. So I look, without even realizing I'm doing it, for something that will quiet it, something that will give me relief, for something that will promise change. And that cycle just goes again. Suddenly we're right back at the very beginning. And that's the loop. Not just spending, regret, but hope, intensity, action, punishment, escape, over and over. And the hardest is that the disappointment isn't just about the item, it's about me. It feels personal, like evidence, like proof that there's something fundamentally wrong with how I am. And I know that's not true. And I know it when I'm calm. But in that moment, the voice is very convincing because it's been rehearsed. It knows all my weak spots. It knows exactly what to say. I'm sharing this part because I think it's where the deepest shame lives. Not in the behavior, but right there in the aftermath. In the way that we turn on ourselves when something doesn't work out, when we couldn't follow through, and the fantasy collapses. And if you're listening to this thinking, oh God, that's me, this is what I want you to know. And I'm sorry that my dog is barking, but come here, Beanie, come. The truth is not, the voice is not the truth about you. It's part of you that learnt to equate punishment with safety. And it's so loud because it's scared, not because it's right. And I wish I had a neat way to silence it, but I don't. But I am learning to notice it, to recognize it as a voice, not a verdict, to pause even just slightly before I believe it. And truthfully, sometimes that's all I can do. Just let it talk without letting define me, not just add to it or not agree with it. And that might not sound like much, but at least it's a start. Starting is always the hardest part. She's gone back to sleep now. I want to be careful how I end this because I don't want anyone listening to think that the point of this episode is that you're powerless or broken or doomed to repeat the same patterns forever. That's not what I believe. And it's definitely not what I've lived. What I do believe is that a lot of us have been trying to understand ourselves through the wrong lens. We've been told this is about willpower or discipline or self-control. And when we don't manage it perfectly, we assume it means something about who we are, that we're irresponsible, naive, or incapable of learning. But when I look at this truthfully with real honesty, that story just doesn't fit because nothing about this experience is careless. Okay, yeah, it's intense. It's purposeful. It's driven by hope, urgency, and a nervous system trying to regulate itself. But that's not a lack of character. That's a system doing its best. And I think one of the most damaging things we can do is turn nervous system responses into moral judgments. We call ourselves weak, greedy, addictive, too much, or whatever it is that you call yourself. And when that's actually happening, it's far more human than that. I don't think the answer is to stop wanting things or to never hope or to shut down that part of us that believes something might help. That part isn't the enemy. It's a part that wants relief, movement, change. And honestly, I don't want to kill that part of me. What I do want is to stop punishing myself for being in a system that sometimes overwhelms me, to stop acting like I should be able to outthink, states that are happening in my body, to stop pretending that awareness automatically equals control. And this episode isn't about solutions, it's about permission. Permission to tell the truth about what this actually feels like. Permission to stop shaming yourself for not being able to do something that was never simple in the first place. Permission to say, this is hard for me, without turning that into a verdict on your worth. And if you're listening to this and recognizing yourself, maybe uncomfortably so, I'd love for you to know that you're not alone in this. Even if you've never heard anybody say it out loud before, even if you've been carrying it quietly for years. And if nothing else shifts after this episode, if you don't spend differently, if the pattern doesn't magically disappear, but you're a little less cruel to yourself afterwards, that ultimately is what matters more than you might realize. Because the way we speak to ourselves after something doesn't work out or shapes everything that comes next. It's not the mistake, it's not the purchase, it's the aftermath. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. You're not a moral failure for struggling with this. You are a human being with a sensitive, driven, hopeful nervous system trying to navigate a world that doesn't always make room for that. And this conversation, well, it's allowed. You're allowed to have it out loud without shame. And I want to thank you for being here with me in this. And if you want to, you can now just sit for a moment, no fixing, no deciding, just noticing how it feels to have something named without being judged. That's enough for today. But before I finish, I want to let you know about Dear Ilja. It's a place where you can send in questions about money, about shame, hyperfocus, or anything this episode has stirred. And you don't need to find the right words. You can be anonymous if that feels safer. I read every single message and I answer them here, slowly, honestly, without judgment. And if this episode felt close to home, Dear Ilja is there for you. Take care of yourself after listening to this. And as always, until next spiral.